In the quiet spaces between our words and in the silence that follows our actions, we reveal our true character. Every day, we navigate a world filled with countless interactions, each one shaping our experience and testing our resolve. The ancient Stoics understood that while we cannot control the characters who enter our lives, we absolutely can master how we respond to them. Today, we embark on a journey through the intricate landscape of human connections, examining how Stoic principles can guide us through the most challenging relationships we encounter. The wisdom of philosophers like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius offers us timeless strategies not just to survive difficult interactions, but to find tranquility amid the chaos they often create. If you find value in these reflections, I invite you to support our work with a simple click of the subscribe button. And please, stay with me throughout this entire exploration. Each segment builds upon the last, creating a comprehensive framework for applying Stoic principles to your daily encounters. Now, let's begin our examination of the different personalities that test our Stoic practice, and how we might respond with wisdom rather than reaction. The emotional vampire stands before you, eyes wide with intensity as they share their latest crisis. Their words pour forth like a torrent, each syllable draining a little more of your energy. You feel yourself becoming exhausted, not from any physical exertion, but from the sheer emotional weight they transfer onto your shoulders. Every conversation feels like a one-way street, with your role clearly defined, to absorb their emotional excess without expectation of reciprocity. What makes the emotional vampire particularly draining is their remarkable ability to sense when you're at your strongest, when your emotional reserves are fullest, and that's precisely when they appear, ready to feed on your abundance. They mistake your compassion for an unlimited resource, one they can tap into whenever their own emotional well runs dry. Before long, you find yourself dreading their presence, knowing that each encounter will leave you depleted, searching for ways to recharge your own batteries. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, cautioned, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving." The process is a mutual one. Men learn as they teach. This wisdom reminds us that healthy relationships involve reciprocal growth. The emotional vampire, however, disrupts this balance, creating a one-sided dynamic that benefits only them. So how might a Stoic approach such a relationship? First, recognize that your kindness is not a weakness but a virtue, one that deserves protection. Establish clear boundaries around when and how you're available to offer support. Perhaps you limit conversations to specific time frames or practice phrases like, "I can listen for the next 15 minutes, but then I need to attend to other matters." Second, cultivate what the Stoics called proper indifference to their emotional storms. This doesn't mean becoming callous or unfeeling, but rather maintaining emotional distance that allows you to offer perspective without being swept away in their currents. Epictetus taught that we should be like the rock against which waves continuously break, steady, unmoved, allowing the water to expend its energy while remaining intact. Finally, redirect their focus toward self-reliance. Guide them toward resources and practices that might help them develop their own emotional resilience. A truly Stoic approach recognizes that the greatest gift we can offer is not indefinite support, but tools for self-sufficiency. By doing so, you honor both your own well-being and their capacity for growth. The strategic flatterer approaches with a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. Their compliments flow freely, perfectly calibrated to strike your most receptive chords. "No one understands this project like you do," they might say, or "Your insight is exactly what we need right now." Their praise feels good, of course it does, but something subtle nags at your intuition. What sets apart the strategic flatterer is not their appreciation of your qualities, but their tactical deployment of that appreciation. Their compliments aren't spontaneous expressions of genuine admiration, but calculated investments expected to yield returns. They've studied your yearnings and insecurities, learning precisely which words will lower your defenses and increase your pliability to their suggestions. In his Meditations, Marcus Aurelius warned himself, "Be suspicious of compliments." When someone praises you, ask yourself, "Why is this person telling me this? What do they want from me?" This healthy skepticism doesn't arise from cynicism, but from a clear-eyed assessment of human nature and the subtle ways influence operates in social contexts. The Stoic approach to flattery begins with self-knowledge. Understand your own vanities and the particular flavors of praise to which you're most susceptible. As Epictetus advised, if someone tells you that a certain person has spoken critically of you, don't bother with excuses or defenses. Just smile and say, He must not know about my other faults. Otherwise, he wouldn't have mentioned only these. This kind of self-awareness disarms the flatterer by removing the power of their manipulative praise. Practice what the Stoics called suspending judgment. Hear the compliment without immediately accepting or rejecting it. Instead, examine it dispassionately. Is there truth in it? Does it align with your own assessment of your character and actions? Is it proportionate to reality? This thoughtful examination creates space between the praise and your reaction to it, allowing you to respond from reason rather than ego. Finally, refocus on virtue as your primary concern. The Stoics taught that the only true good is virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. External validation, no matter how eloquently expressed, has no bearing on your character. By orienting yourself toward these internal standards rather than external approval, you render flattery powerless over your decisions and actions. The conflict entrepreneur thrives in environments of discord. While others seek to resolve tensions, this person seems mysteriously present whenever disagreements arise, often making observations that inflame rather than soothe. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but they begin, before sharing information perfectly designed to trigger mistrust or resentment. What makes the conflict entrepreneur particularly disruptive is their ability to maintain plausible deniability. They don't explicitly create conflict, they simply share concerns or provide context that happens to drive wedges between people. They position themselves as neutral observers while strategically dropping matches into social kindling, then watching with hidden satisfaction as relationships burn. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus observed that small-minded people habitually reproach others for their own misfortunes. Those of average ability reproach themselves. Those of superior ability reproach neither others nor themselves. The conflict entrepreneur exemplifies the small-minded approach, finding satisfaction in others' discord rather than focusing on their own character development. A Stoic response begins with recognition. Train yourself to notice when conversations with certain people consistently leave you feeling more negative toward others. Does this person frequently share concerns about colleagues or friends? Do they often position themselves as warning you about others' supposed criticism of you? These patterns suggest you may be dealing with someone who benefits from conflict. Practice what Seneca called the delay of reaction. When presented with potentially inflammatory information, respond with, "I'll need to think about that," rather than allowing an immediate emotional response. This creates space for rational assessment. Is this information necessary? Is it verified? What purpose does sharing it serve? Often, in that space of reflection, you'll recognize the provocation for what it is. Most importantly, refuse to participate in the enterprise of conflict. The Stoics emphasized our responsibility for our own actions. While you cannot control whether someone attempts to draw you into drama, you absolutely can control whether you invest in it. Decline to speak negatively about absent parties, redirect conversations toward constructive topics, and explicitly state your preference for direct communication over triangulation. The intellectual showboater speaks not to communicate but to perform. Their vocabulary is deliberately obscure, their references intentionally esoteric, and their arguments structured to showcase their brilliance rather than to reach understanding. Conversations with them feel less like exchanges and more like attending lectures where your role is simply to admire their cognitive prowess. What distinguishes the intellectual showboater is their investment in appearing wise rather than being wise. While genuine thinkers welcome questions and acknowledge the limits of their knowledge, the showboater treats challenges as personal affronts. They've confused the trappings of wisdom, complex language, extensive citations, confident pronouncements, with wisdom itself. Epictetus drew a sharp distinction between these types. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. The showboater, convinced of their superior understanding, has closed themselves off from the very quality that defines true wisdom, the recognition of how much remains unknown. A Stoic response begins with genuine curiosity. Ask questions not to challenge but to understand. Could you help me understand how you reached that conclusion? Or, I'm interested in exploring that idea further. What would you say to this counterpoint? Often, these sincere inquiries reveal whether someone's knowledge has depth or merely decorative flourish. Practice what Marcus Aurelius called sympathetic understanding. Consider that the showboater's need to display intellectual dominance likely comes from insecurity rather than confidence. This perspective allows you to respond with compassion rather than competitiveness. You might gently introduce other viewpoints not as corrections but as additions. I've also found this perspective valuable. Finally, focus on the pursuit of truth rather than victory. The Stoics believed that wisdom comes through collaborative inquiry, not competitive debate. By maintaining this focus, you model a healthier relationship with knowledge, one based on growth rather than display. Sometimes the most powerful response to intellectual peacocking is simply to demonstrate an alternative way of engaging with ideas. The responsibility shifter approaches life as if accountability were a hot potato, something to pass along as quickly as possible. When projects falter under their watch, circumstances are to blame. When they fail to meet commitments, unforeseen obstacles prevented their success. When their actions harm others, they were merely responding to provocation. Their narrative consistently positions them as the protagonist beset by an uncooperative world rather than as an agent capable of influencing outcomes. What makes the responsibility shifter particularly frustrating is how their behavior undermines collective trust. In environments where they operate, people become reluctant to collaborate, knowing that any failure will become someone else's fault while any success will be claimed as their personal triumph. Their presence creates a climate of suspicion and defensive documentation. Epictetus addressed this mindset directly. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. The responsibility shifter inverts this wisdom, focusing obsessively on what lies outside their control while neglecting what lies within it. A Stoic response begins with clear agreements. Before collaborating with known responsibility shifters, explicitly outline expectations, deadlines, and accountability measures. Document these agreements not from distrust, but from a practical recognition of how memory can be selective under pressure. This clarity serves everyone, eliminating the ambiguity in which blame shifting thrives. Practice what the Stoics called the reserve clause. Approach commitments with the phrase, fate permitting, in mind. This acknowledges that while we control our intentions and efforts, outcomes are subject to factors beyond our control. By embracing this perspective yourself, you model a balanced approach to responsibility, neither claiming control over the uncontrollable nor denying agency where you possess it. Most importantly, maintain your own standard of accountability regardless of others' behavior. As Marcus Aurelius advised, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Your consistent willingness to acknowledge both your successes and failures creates a powerful contrast to the shifter's evasions, one that others will notice and respect, even if the shifter themselves remains unchanged. The ethical chameleon adjusts their principles to match their surroundings with remarkable flexibility. Among environmentalists, they express passion for sustainability. In business settings, they champion pragmatic efficiency. With different social groups, their views on politics, religion, or social issues shift to maintain approval. What's unsettling is not that they hold complex perspectives, but that their convictions seem entirely context-dependent, changing not through growth but through calculation. What makes the ethical chameleon particularly difficult to engage with is the moving target they present. Just when you think you understand their values, they transform to accommodate a different audience. This inconsistency makes meaningful connection challenging. How do you relate authentically to someone who reveals no stable core? Seneca addressed this tendency toward ethical flexibility. The first sign of a mind in health is that it can hold firmly to one subject and linger upon it. He recognized that while our understanding may evolve, this evolution should reflect genuine development rather than social convenience. A Stoic response begins with observing patterns rather than instances. Instead of focusing on any single inconsistency, notice the meta-pattern of how their positions align with whoever holds power or influence in a given context. This awareness helps you avoid the confusion that comes from expecting consistency from someone whose primary consistency lies in their adaptability. Practice what the Stoics called speaking plainly in your own expressions. Without attacking the chameleon's approach, demonstrate through your own behavior what it looks like to maintain principle even when it's socially costly. This doesn't mean rigidity or rudeness. True principles accommodate courtesy without requiring ethical compromise. Perhaps most valuably, develop compassion for what drives such adaptation. The chameleon changes colors not from malice but from a profound fear of rejection. Their behavior reflects not moral corruption but a fragile sense of belonging that requires constant reassurance through approval. This understanding allows you to maintain appropriate boundaries without contempt, recognizing their behavior as a human response to insecurity rather than a character flaw beyond comprehension. The passive aggressor wields subtle weapons: the pointed sigh, the muttered comment, the backhanded compliment. Their aggression is draped in plausible deniability. "I was just joking, you're being too sensitive, that's not what I meant at all." They express hostility while simultaneously denying its existence, creating an environment where you begin to question your own perceptions rather than addressing their behavior. What makes passive aggression particularly corrosive is how it prevents direct resolution. Explicit conflict can be addressed. Implied grievances remain perpetually unresolved. You find yourself navigating conversational minefields, never certain when an innocuous comment might trigger a disproportionate reaction disguised as casual observation. Marcus Aurelius offered guidance relevant to such interactions. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? He recognized that responding to subtle aggression with open hostility only escalates situations while validating the passive aggressor's narrative of victimhood. A Stoic response begins with maintaining internal clarity. Trust your perceptions while recognizing that your interpretations may contain errors. You might think, "I notice tension in this interaction. Whether intentional or not, something feels unresolved here." This acknowledgement honors your experience without insisting on perfect accuracy in assigning motives. Practice what Epictetus called examining impressions. When you feel stung by a comment, ask yourself, what judgment am I attaching to these words? What insecurity does this trigger in me? Often, passive aggression targets existing vulnerabilities. By recognizing these sensitivities, you can respond to the substance rather than reacting to the style of delivery. In direct engagement, offer what the Stoics would recognize as virtuous transparency. Name the dynamic you perceive without accusation. "I notice there seems to be tension between us. If something's bothering you, I'm open to discussing it directly." This approach offers an opportunity for genuine resolution while demonstrating a preference for clarity over comfort, a truly Stoic priority. The chronic interrupter seems physically incapable of allowing others to complete their thoughts. They jump in mid-sentence, redirect conversations toward their own experiences, and demonstrate more interest in waiting for their turn to speak than in understanding what's being said. Their interruptions aren't occasional enthusiastic lapses, but a consistent pattern that reveals a fundamental stance toward dialogue. They value their own voice above all others. What makes the chronic interrupter particularly challenging in relationships is how their behavior systematically devalues others' contributions. Over time, those around them speak less, share less, and engage less, creating interactions that grow increasingly shallow and one-sided. What could be mutual exploration becomes instead a monologue with occasional punctuation. The Stoic philosopher Zeno observed that, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we say." This simple recognition of our physical design suggests a natural proportion for conversation, one the interrupter consistently ignores in favor of their own expression. A Stoic response begins with managing your own reactions. Notice the frustration that arises when interrupted without allowing it to escalate into resentment. As Epictetus taught, remember that it is not the person who reviles or strikes you who insults you, but your judgment that these things are insulting. By recognizing that interruption reflects on the interrupter's habits rather than your worth, you create space for a measured response. Practice what the Stoics would recognize as gentle persistence. When interrupted, wait for a pause, then calmly state, "I'd like to finish my thought." If necessary, simply continue speaking where you left off, maintaining your composure while defending your right to complete your contribution. This assertiveness without aggression honors both your perspective and the potential for more balanced dialogue. For relationships where this pattern persists, consider a direct, private conversation about communication styles. Frame this not as criticism but as clarification of needs. "I've noticed our conversations often involve interruptions. I value hearing your thoughts, and I also need space to express mine completely. How might we find a better balance?" This approach invites collaboration rather than complaint, focusing on future improvement rather than past frustration. The grudge keeper maintains a perfect mental archive of every perceived slight, error, or offense you've ever committed. Their memory for grievances operates with remarkable precision, recalling with perfect clarity that dismissive comment you made 3 years ago or the time you arrived 15 minutes late to an event in 2018. These past transgressions aren't simply remembered, they're actively maintained, regularly revisited and strategically deployed during moments of vulnerability. What makes the grudge keeper particularly toxic in relationships is how they prevent genuine resolution. True forgiveness creates space for growth and renewal. The grudge keeper's selective memory ensures that relationships remain defined by their worst moments rather than their potential for evolution. Their catalog of offenses becomes a security blanket, protecting them from the vulnerability of authentic connection. Seneca addressed this tendency toward perpetual accounting of grievances. To err is human, but to persist in error is diabolical. He recognized that holding on to past wrongs long after their occurrence reflects not moral clarity but emotional stagnation, a refusal to acknowledge the fluid nature of human development. A Stoic response begins with distinguishing between accountability and punishment. Acknowledge legitimate wrongs when they're raised, offer sincere apologies where appropriate, and demonstrate through actions that you've integrated the lesson. This honors the valid core of their grievance while refusing to accept eternal penance as the price of relationship. Practice what the Stoics called memento mori, the remembrance of death. This contemplative exercise reminds us of life's brevity and prompts reflection on how we wish to spend our limited time. When faced with someone who consistently returns to past wounds, consider, is this how I want to invest my finite days, relitigating unchangeable history rather than creating a better present? This perspective can help you maintain compassion for their pain while setting boundaries around endless rehearsal of grievances. Finally, recognize when a relationship has become primarily historical rather than present-focused. The Stoics valued justice but also practicality. Some relationships, particularly those that have devolved into archives of mutual offense, may require either fundamental renegotiation or compassionate conclusion. Your energy is a non-renewable resource. Invest it where growth remains possible. The reality distorter seems to inhabit a parallel universe where facts are flexible and truth is negotiable. They make claims with absolute certainty that contradict observable reality, rewrite shared history to cast themselves in a better light, or insist on versions of events that bear little resemblance to what actually transpired. What's most disorienting is not just their inaccuracy but their complete conviction. They believe their distortions with such intensity that you begin to question your own perception. What makes the reality distorter particularly destabilizing is how they undermine the foundation of meaningful exchange. Productive dialogue requires some shared agreement about basic facts. When this common ground erodes, conversation becomes not just difficult but functionally impossible. You find yourself in absurd debates not about interpretations or implications, but about whether something plainly observable actually occurred. Marcus Aurelius offered guidance for such scenarios. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. While this acknowledges the subjective nature of perception, it doesn't surrender the concept of objective reality. Instead, it invites us to recognize that even distorted perspectives reflect some underlying human need or fear. A Stoic response begins with internal anchoring. Before engaging with known reality distorters, remind yourself of what you know to be true based on evidence, documentation, and reliable witness. This self-alignment prevents the cognitive disorientation that often occurs when someone confidently asserts falsehoods. As Epictetus advised, the beginning of philosophy is the recognition of the conflict between opinions. Practice what the Stoics called proper judgment. When faced with distortions, distinguish between harmless inaccuracies and consequential falsehoods. Someone misremembering a restaurant where you dine together requires different engagement than someone denying important promises or commitments. Reserve your energy for addressing distortions that matter while letting inconsequential ones pass without correction. For significant distortions, rely on documentation rather than debate. Instead of arguing about what was said or promised, refer to emails, texts, or other records. Present these not as weapons but as aids to shared understanding. I'm noticing we remember this differently. Here's what I have in writing. Perhaps this helps clarify. This approach shifts the conversation from competitive recollection to collaborative clarification. As we conclude our exploration of challenging relationship dynamics through a Stoic lens, remember that these principles aren't simply philosophical abstractions. They're practical tools for maintaining tranquility amid social complexity. The people we've discussed, the emotional vampire, the strategic flatterer, the conflict entrepreneur, the intellectual showboater, the responsibility shifter, the ethical chameleon, the passive aggressor, the chronic interrupter, and the reality distorter, represent patterns we all encounter throughout our lives. The Stoic approach to these challenging personalities doesn't promise to transform them. As Epictetus reminds us, don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. People will behave according to their own nature and habits. Our freedom lies not in controlling their behavior, but in choosing our response to it. What Stoicism offers is something far more valuable than the power to change others. It provides the perspective to maintain our equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. By focusing on what Marcus Aurelius called the ruling faculty, our capacity for rational choice, we reclaim our peace of mind from those who would inadvertently or intentionally disturb it. Remember that the purpose of applying Stoic principles isn't to judge others, but to liberate ourselves from reactive patterns that diminish our well-being. As Seneca observed, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. This wisdom applies equally to all difficult emotions triggered by challenging personalities. By creating space between stimulus and response, we discover our power to choose virtue over reaction. If you found value in these reflections, I invite you to join our community of modern Stoics by subscribing to the Modern Stoic. Our next video, appearing on your screen now, explores how to cultivate Stoic resilience during major life transitions. Until we meet again, remember the words of Epictetus: make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Thank you for your presence and attention. May your path be guided by wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, the cardinal virtues that have illuminated the Stoic way for more than 2,000 years.